I still remember the night everything changed. It was late, and the road was almost empty as I drove back to my house after a long day. My home sat quietly on the edge of a small town in Europe, a place I always found peaceful. I was thinking about simple things, what I would eat, whether I should call my sister Clara the next day, when suddenly, bright headlights rushed toward me. I didn't even have time to react. There was a loud crash, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. The room was white and silent, except for the soft beeping of machines. My body felt heavy, and even turning my head was painful. A nurse named Emily told me I had been unconscious for days after a serious car accident. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt broken. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into 2 long months. Being stuck in that hospital was harder than I expected. My parents came a few times, but they always seemed in a hurry. My siblings, who lived in America, barely called. I spent most of my time alone, staring at the ceiling and thinking about my life. That's when Clara stepped in. She visited me one afternoon and held my hand, telling me not to worry. She said she would stay at my house and take care of everything while I recovered. I trusted her without question. My house meant everything to me, and I believed she would protect it. So I gave her the keys, never imagining that this simple decision would change everything. The day I was finally discharged from the hospital felt unreal. After 2 long months of staring at the same white walls and listening to the same quiet sounds, stepping outside felt like entering a different world. The air felt fresher, the sky looked brighter, and for a moment, I thought everything was going to be okay again. I just wanted to go home, sit in my living room, and feel like myself again. The drive back to my house was slow. A man named Daniel, who worked with the hospital transport service, helped me get there safely. As we moved through the quiet streets of the town in Europe, I felt both nervous and excited. I kept thinking about my house, the wooden floors, the clean windows, the small garden outside that I used to take care of every weekend. I imagined everything just as I had left it, maybe even better, since Clara had promised to take care of it. But the moment we pulled up outside, something felt wrong. There were pieces of trash near the front door. Empty bottles lay in the corner of the yard. The garden, once full of life, looked dry and forgotten. I tried to ignore the feeling in my chest as I slowly walked toward the door, my hands shaking slightly as I unlocked it. As soon as I stepped inside, the smell hit me. It was strong and unpleasant, like old food mixed with smoke and something worse. I froze for a second, hoping I was imagining it, but I wasn't. The house was a mess. There were empty bottles and plastic cups scattered across the floor. The furniture was out of place, some of it scratched and damaged. There were stains on the walls and the carpet, and I didn't even want to guess where they came from. This wasn't my home anymore. It didn't feel like it, and it didn't look like it. Daniel looked around in shock. He shook his head and said quietly, "This is not normal." I couldn't even respond. My mind was trying to understand what I was seeing, but it didn't make sense. I had trusted Clara. I had believed she would protect this place. I slowly walked from room to room. The kitchen was worse than the living room. Dishes were piled high in the sink, some of them covered in mold. The floor was sticky under my feet. In the bedroom, my things had been moved around carelessly. Drawers were open, clothes were thrown on the floor, and some of my personal items were missing. It felt like strangers had been living here. I stepped outside and sat on the front steps, trying to breathe. My chest felt tight, and my head was spinning. I pulled out my phone and called Clara. It rang a few times before she finally answered. "Hello?" she said, her voice sounding normal, almost casual. "Clara, what happened to my house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a short pause, and then she replied, "What do you mean?" "What do I mean?" I repeated, louder now. "It's destroyed. There's trash everywhere. The house smells terrible." "What did you do?" She sighed, like I was the one causing trouble. "I had some people over a few times." "You're overreacting." "A few times," I said, unable to believe her words. "This doesn't look like a few times. This looks like constant parties." She didn't answer right away, which told me everything I needed to know. Later that evening, she came to the house. She walked in like nothing was wrong, like this was all normal. She didn't look shocked or embarrassed. She didn't even apologize. I looked at her and said, "You promised me you would take care of this place." "I did," she said, crossing her arms. "It's still standing, isn't it?" Her words hurt more than I expected. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about trust. While I was lying in a hospital bed, struggling to recover, she had turned my home into something I didn't even recognize. The next day, I spoke to one of my neighbors, a woman named Olivia. She told me everything I didn't want to hear. She said loud music played almost every weekend. People were coming and going at all hours of the night. Cars were parked everywhere, and sometimes there were arguments outside. I was worried, Olivia said gently, but I didn't know how to reach you. Hearing that made it even worse. This wasn't just one or two bad decisions. This had been happening for weeks, maybe the entire time I was gone. I went back inside and stood in the middle of the living room, looking around at what used to be my safe place. I felt angry, hurt, and deeply disappointed. But more than anything, I felt betrayed. I had trusted my own sister with the one place that meant the most to me. And now, I was standing in the middle of the damage, realizing that trust had been completely broken. The next morning, I woke up feeling worse than I had the night before. It wasn't just the physical pain from the accident anymore. It was something heavier, something harder to explain. I was sitting in a house that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by the damage someone I trusted had caused. For a few minutes, I just sat there in silence, staring at the mess, trying to figure out where to even begin. I knew I couldn't fix everything on my own. My body was still weak, and even simple tasks made me tired. So I decided to call a professional cleaning company. It wasn't something I wanted to spend money on, but I didn't have a choice. The house needed serious work. Later that day, two men arrived. One of them introduced himself as Daniel, and the other as Marcus. The moment they stepped inside, they both paused. They didn't need to say anything, their expression said enough. Daniel walked slowly through the living room, looking at the floor, the walls, and the furniture. Marcus checked the kitchen and shook his head. "This is going to take time," Daniel finally said. "And it's not going to be cheap." I nodded quietly. I already knew that. They spent hours inspecting the house, taking notes, and discussing what needed to be done. I followed them slowly, watching as they pointed out damage I hadn't even noticed yet. Some of the stains on the carpet would need deep cleaning. Parts of the furniture might not be fixable. The kitchen would require a full sanitation process. By the end of the day, Daniel handed me a paper with the total cost written clearly at the bottom, $3,000. I stared at the number, hoping I had read it wrong. But I hadn't. $3,000. It felt like a punishment for something I didn't even do. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hospital bills I already had, the time I had lost, and now this. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became, this wasn't my responsibility. I hadn't caused this damage. Clara had. The next day, I called her and asked her to come over again. When she arrived, she looked just as calm as before, like none of this mattered. I handed her the paper without saying anything. She glanced at it quickly and then looked back at me. "What is this?" "It's the cleaning bill," I said. $3,000. You need to pay for it." She actually laughed. "I'm not paying that," she said, shaking her head. "That's your house." I felt my hands tighten. "It's my house, but you were the one living here. You were the one throwing parties. This happened because of you." She rolled her eyes. "You're acting like I destroyed the place on purpose. People came over, that's all. Things happen." "Things don't just happen like this," I replied, my voice rising. "You promised to take care of everything. I trusted you." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked around the room like she was bored of the conversation. That hurt more than her words. "I'm not paying," she repeated. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." At that moment, I realized something I hadn't wanted to accept before. She didn't feel guilty at all. I decided to reach out to my parents, hoping they would understand. I called my father first. His name is Richard, and he has always been someone I thought would be fair in situations like this. But I was wrong. After I explained everything, he sighed and said, "It's just a cleaning bill. Why are you turning this into a family problem?" "Because it is a family problem," I said. "Clara caused this damage. She should take responsibility." "She's your sister," he replied. "You should be more understanding." Understanding? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I then spoke to my mother, Helen. I hoped she would at least listen, but she only made things worse. "You've always been too sensitive," she said. "Just pay it and move on." One by one, I tried talking to my siblings as well. My brother James, who lives in America, didn't even let me finish explaining. I don't want to get involved, he said before hanging up. My younger sister Sophie stopped replying to my messages completely. It felt like I was being pushed out of my own family. Days passed, and the silence from them grew louder. No calls, no messages, nothing. It was like they had all decided that I was the problem. In the end, I had no choice. The cleaning company couldn't wait forever. I signed the papers and agreed to pay the $3,000 myself. Watching them start the work on the house felt strange. I was grateful it was finally being cleaned, but at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about how unfair it all was. As I stood there, watching strangers fix the damage, I realized something important. The money hurt, but it wasn't the worst part. The worst part was knowing that the people I trusted the most had chosen not to stand by me. And that kind of loss was much harder to repair than any house. After the cleaners finished their work, my house looked almost like it used to. The floors were shining again, the air felt fresh, and the mess was finally gone. But even though everything looked clean, the feeling inside me was still heavy. It was strange how a place could look the same but feel completely different. I walked through each room slowly, taking my time. The living room, the kitchen, the bedroom, everything was back in order, yet it didn't feel like home the way it once did. Every corner reminded me of what had happened. Not just the parties or the damage, but the trust that had been broken. At first, I kept hoping things would change. I would check my phone every morning, thinking maybe Clara would call or send a message. Maybe my parents would realize they were wrong. Maybe someone would at least ask how I was doing after everything. But the days passed, and nothing came. No calls, no messages, no apologies. That silence said more than words ever could. One evening, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the wall. The quiet was deep, almost uncomfortable. I thought about the accident, the hospital, and everything that followed. I had survived something serious, something that could have taken my life. And yet, the people I thought would support me had turned away when I needed them most. It hurt, but it also opened my eyes. I realized I had been waiting for something that might never happen. I was waiting for people to care in a way they clearly didn't. And the more I waited, the more I felt stuck. That's when I understood something important. I couldn't keep living like that. The next morning, I made a choice. It wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. I decided to stop waiting. I got up, made myself a simple breakfast, and for the first time in a while, I focused only on what I needed. Not what my family thought, not what Clara did, but what I needed to move forward. Later that day, I went outside into my small garden. It was still weak from being ignored for so long, but not completely gone. I picked up a watering can and began to take care of it again. It was a small action, but it felt meaningful. Each plant I watered felt like a step toward rebuilding something, not just the garden, but my life. The work was slow. My body was still recovering, and I couldn't do too much at once. But I stayed consistent. A little each day. Cleaning, organizing, fixing small things around the house. With every task, I felt a bit stronger. I also started to change my routine. I began taking short walks around the neighborhood, enjoying the fresh air and quiet streets. Sometimes I would see my neighbor, Olivia, who had been kind to me from the beginning. She would smile, ask how I was doing, and sometimes we would talk for a while. Those small conversations meant more than I expected. They reminded me that kindness still existed, even if it didn't come from where I had hoped. A few weeks later, I made another important decision. I changed my phone number. It felt like closing a door. I knew it meant that if my family ever tried to reach me, they wouldn't be able to. But at the same time, I realized something. They hadn't tried anyway. Holding on to that connection was only giving me false hope. So I let it go. After that, something inside me felt lighter. Not completely free, but better than before. I wasn't checking my phone anymore. I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just living my life, one day at a time. I slowly returned to work as well. It wasn't easy at first, but it felt good to have purpose again. To focus on something productive. To remind myself that I was capable of standing on my own. As the weeks turned into months, my house began to feel like home again. Not because it looked the same, but because I had rebuilt it myself. Every clean space, every fixed detail, every living plant in the garden was a result of my effort. And that made it more meaningful than before. Of course, there were still moments when the past came back to me. Sometimes, late at night, I would think about Clara. I would wonder how things could have been different. I would think about my parents and question why they didn't stand by me. Those thoughts didn't disappear completely. but I learned not to let them control me. I accepted that some people don't change, and some relationships don't heal the way we want them to. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is move forward without them. One afternoon, I was sitting in my garden, watching the sunlight fall over the plants. They were green again, alive again, just like before. In that moment, I felt something calm and steady inside me. Not happiness exactly, but peace. A quiet understanding that I had made it through something difficult. That I had faced loss, disappointment, and pain, and still managed to rebuild. I realized that strength doesn't always come from others. Sometimes, it comes from being alone and choosing to keep going anyway. Now, when I look at my house, I don't just see a place to live. I see everything I went through and everything I overcame. It's no longer just a home. It's a reminder. A reminder that I survived. A reminder that I rebuilt. And most importantly, a reminder that I can stand on my own, no matter who walks away.